so much of my point of view and so much of what I'm paid for is presenting my point of view is informed by being queer in my identity. My perspective and being willing to show up as my full self at work was improving my thinking and allowing me to do great work. Hi, I'm Sam Laubach. I use they, them pronouns. I am an associate strategist at Siegel & Gale. I identify as bisexual and non-binary. I would describe my profession to someone who hasn't heard of it as, kind of the things that happen before the advertising, because I think that's what so many people have seen. It's working with companies to figure out what's true of them and what's going to resonate with their customers, but it's figuring out like who they are, how they act, how they talk, how they look, and how they ultimately show up in the world and what those experiences look like. I grew up in Chicago, in the city, Chicago proper. I have a Chicago tattoo, which is required for everyone who grows up there. It was a nice place to grow up. I definitely felt very safe in Chicago, which is kind of opposite of what is often said on the news about it. But especially as a queer person, I grew up walking distance from a very gay neighborhood. So I was able to go and spend time there and see other queer people. And that was particularly important to me. And I honestly kind of took it for granted until I left Chicago for a period of time and moved to Southern Indiana to do college for a few years and realized how good I had it. My family is very accepting. I'm definitely lucky there. I had anxiety about coming out, certainly, but it was fine. But no, I had friends in my neighborhood. I had a good community at school. I went to a kind of niche high school where it was basically really nerdy. It was a really nerdy high school, but because it was smaller, I had opportunities to develop lots of small communities. So I had community with the theater kids. I was an actor. I had community with the mathletes. It wasn't social suicide at my school. And I was able to be in a gay straight alliance and a choir. And I was able to find all these different communities, usually based around my interests. That's how I've consistently built community in my life. Both of my parents have been role models to me. I grew up hearing about how my mom was going to marches and for abortion rights and women's rights. I grew up with a very politically active role model, which definitely has informed how I've gone through the world. And I grew up with a very creative father who actually worked in the same industry I work in now. Beyond that, I had some great teachers that still stand out. Some that, it was them consistently showing up for me. Particularly one of the teachers who led the math team was really great. High school wasn't all kind of rainbows and butterflies. There were definitely some struggles that were happening there. And even when I went through periods where I was kind of a quote unquote bad kid, a little bit rebellious, and he was really helpful in that. And then there were other teachers who were less actively engaged as role models, but who said things that really stuck with me. One example is I had an English teacher who basically wrote an essay that he handed out to the seniors every year because it was such STEM-oriented high school. That was, just because you're good at math doesn't mean you have to do math. And that was important for me. I went off to college and I started as a math major and I ended up graduating ultimately 15 years later, 10 years later with a degree in film, of all things. So being given that permission and encouragement to both explore the things that I was good at, but also not be limited by that has really improved my life in major ways. I realized I was queer when I was 14. I was watching Billy Elliot, and one of the scenes, Billy's friend kisses him, and I'm like, he's cute. I would like to kiss him. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm queer. So film and representation has always been a huge part of kind of my story and my relationship to my own queerness. And that's part of why I think it's really important. So that's when I realized I was bi. And then in terms of realizing that I was non-binary, that came much later because I really didn't have the language or the points of reference to understand that. And I also had only experienced gender the way I'd experienced it. And I thought that everyone was walking around feeling completely detached from their gender, and everyone was just I guess I'm this because everyone says I'm this, and I don't feel connected to it, but that's fine. In the last couple of years, as that language became more available to me, that I was able to recontextualize. I mean, even in college in Indiana in 2011, people knew there was like gender stuff going on because I would talk about it, but I never really connected the dots for another decade nearly. I had a lot of access to queer places as a young person. In the summers, I would act at community theater. And theater is a queer space pretty consistently. One of my directors there was out, and at one point, he looked at me and was like, "You're like me," and then walked away. And I didn't know what that meant until years later. And it just like came back to me. I'm like, oh, that's what he meant. And he was absolutely right. Yeah, so theater was great, not just because it was an open space as a queer person, but also because it was, an opportunity to explore how I was feeling and try on different hats, so to speak. And that was really valuable and safe. We had a gay straight alliance, which I always joked that I was the alliance as a bi person. Yeah, so that was great. And then in college, there were communities that existed. I joined a community gay choir, and I helped found a gay fraternity on my campus. I had to create the community that I wanted to be a part of to some extent, and that continues to carry over to now, where I try to create that community in my industry, working with an organization called Do the Work, which is on a mission to increase queer creativity and share voice in marketing and advertising. And what I do for them is I've brought together a group of consultants, and by the time this airs, maybe we'll be out in the world consulting to agencies and brands about the queer experience in marketing, and if not, coming soon. The artistic side definitely is where being a drag performer is. It's going back to being a kid and wanting to get in front of people, and it combines so many different interests. And actually, I mean, it's been great. My coworkers have come to my shows, which is just like a nice aside about the culture where I work. The analytical side definitely does come through with drag. When I'm thinking about, okay, like what's the story I'm trying to tell, and setting up the elements of that. So I participate annually in a queer comedy festival that is a competition. And this year I took a very analytical approach to doing well in the competition. So I looked at what was going on in culture, and one of the things that's going on in culture is like all of this like fear and madness around drag queen story hours. And then I had a story that I wanted to tell on stage for years and never knew quite how to frame it, about a time where I don't know if this is appropriate. For an afternoon, catfished my friends. They learned about Craigslist personals. They were very excited. They came to me and were like, "Hey, do you know about this?" I'm like, "I came up before Grindr. I know about Craigslist." I posted an ad and they replied. So I've been like trying to figure out how to tell this story on stage for years. And I realized that the way to do this story and to do well in this competition by being differentiated and like inconsistent with the moment was to do a story hour in drag about this experience, and really approach it of like, here's the story, but like it's about this really kind of like juxtaposed, like irreverent topic. I had the goal, which was to do well in the competition. By the time this airs, we will know if I won the competition or not. I probably didn't, because there were so many people in it, but I've like advanced through rounds. And so being able to like think strategically about how to do well and then artistically is really fun for me, and that's definitely part of it. My interest in STEAM kind of happened to me. I didn't realize that I liked math until I was doing it. It was just a situation where I instead of doing my math homework, I was doing harder math and then failing my math classes because I was bored. But no, I found out that I loved math when I started doing the math team, because it was just much more kind of like creative, challenging problems to solve, and a community of people who really liked math. And it was just fun going around the city and going out to the suburbs and taking tests recreationally. But that was really exciting to me because I really liked that there was a right answer, and I liked being able to like show how I got there. So that was always really interesting to me, kind of the puzzle of it. The more creative side, winding up with film and the art side of it all, was just growing up in theater. When it came time to like study and pick a new major, film made sense because like I talked about like how I knew I was queer. It was watching movies, and that was something that like that storytelling was really compelling to me. Yeah, and then in terms of how I got into marketing, like I found out that there was a field that like had been right in front of my face all along, that combined both like my abilities and my interests, being able to use that analytical side and that artistic side at the same time, was really appealing to me. because I'd worked jobs that weren't as creative, and I found that that was really lacking. Like working in sales, I was working in logistics. I would look at their business and how they were moving things around, and I would come up with a solution that would save them time and save them money. So it was really easy because it was just talking to people and showing my work and being like, hey, I proved that you need us. But it wasn't super creatively fulfilling. So I moved away from that. And then I knew that I didn't want to do a purely creative job. I started doing stand up. That was great, but I realized I didn't want to do that as a job either, because that didn't have that problem solving in the same way. And also it required being on the road half the year if one wants to do it successfully. It was nice to find that marketing was somewhere where I could be around super creative people, I could be around super analytical people, and I could use both every day. And that's exciting. Eventually I just decided to be less rebellious. I was looking at what jobs existed. I had taken this break from college and decided that my life would be easier if I finished my bachelor's. In thinking about what I wanted to study, like I knew I wanted to do something on the arts side. And I just thought about, okay, what am I good at? What do I like? And marketing came up. And I was like, okay, I don't need to be rebellious anymore. I can do a job I love. My educational journey was winding, to say the least. So it started with 3.5 years at Indiana University. I started as a math major. I wanted to be, like my role models, like I wanted to be a high school math teacher. That was what I was going to do with my life. And I took those classes, but I also started, taking other things. I took a gender studies class, and that kind of completely shifted everything I was thinking about, because I was like living in the world. Like I hadn't come out as non-binary. I didn't know what non-binary was. So like I really wanted to understand parts of my identity and parts of culture because I was living in it, and I found it confusing. A lot of gender studies and a lot of like what my work is now is really, it's proofs, right? Like you have the thing that you're trying to get to, and you have to put together the steps to get there. And I really ended up using that a lot. I struggled in Southern Indiana. It was not a great place for me. I did not graduate college. I took a gap in my education. When I went back to school, I knew I wanted to do something really creative. I knew I could think logically. I knew I could put all that together, but I really got the most enjoyment out of the creative side of things. So film was a natural fit. And in terms of what I do today, it really sits in the middle, right? Between this really kind of like left brain, right brain, regardless of what you think about left brain, right brain. On the one hand, we're taking all of these inputs and we're getting, the business documents from these brands that we're working with, where like I really have to be able to take in and understand data. But then ultimately how it's going to be expressed is through a creative idea. So within my industry, there's multiple realms. So like people on the market research side, the insight side, which I've done some work there, are the ones who are doing math every day. And that is cool. And then on the other side, there's the designers and there's the copywriters, and they're much more on just the art side. And so it makes sense for me not to be like super bisexual about it, but refusing to pick a side. Going into college, I thought kind of the two jobs you could do with math was you could teach math or you could be an actuary. I was told that I wasn't good enough at sitting still to be an actuary. So math teacher it was. And I really was not going to go into marketing because everyone in my family was in marketing. I'm like, I'm not doing that. So marketing, specifically branding and advertising, is a very queer industry. Like we definitely over-index on queerness in that industry. There's definitely, the guy who gave me my first job is gay. I was introduced to him by his sister, who also works in the industry, because she was like, you're queer and in New York, and you are trying to get a job in the discipline that my brother works in, so you should meet him. There have been environments where kind of my queerness has been more like welcomed than others, but really kind of more useful than others. It's been proven out time and time again that diversity and diverse teams create better work. And the better work I've done has been on teams that have very much like welcomed my queerness. It is really important for queer people to find each other. And why it's been great that I've gotten so many introductions that way is like there is a level of understanding, because being queer is not one experience. Knowing that there are people ahead of me who have been in my industry longer, who have made it to levels of seniority that hopefully someday I'll make it to, has been really valuable. And also it allows me to be more candid in certain ways than maybe I wouldn't be with someone who doesn't share those parts of my identity. Being introduced to queer mentors and other queer people in my industry, I'm able to see the paths they took to get to where I want to be. I'm in a role where I get to talk to people in the C-suites of these just giant corporations. And that is amazing. And I get to do things that end up in front of like the CEOs of brands that we've heard of, that we've used, right? That we grew up with. And so what I'm most proud of is when we're talking about culture and we're talking about communities and how to build community, that I'm putting a queer perspective in that. And that's not the only perspective that I'm putting in. As an example of a brand that does a great job at building community is Mister, right? Which is telemedicine for PrEP. And they do an amazing job at building community and gaining trust with the community by showing up in queer spaces, right? Like thinking about like Lakeview in Chicago, a very gay neighborhood, like storefronts were closed. So they, basically use the storefronts as billboards. They're sending people into bars. They're sponsoring queer media. And bringing that example in is an example that, first of all, like a random straight person wouldn't have brought in, but like also it's like showing the value, like bringing those examples and putting that representation in front of some of like arguably like the most powerful people in business. And like, that's what I'm really proud of, because like, I think that if I continue to do that and other people continue to do that, like that's the channel where like you're creating a business case for inclusion. Like that's what's going to resonate with them, and that's what's going to ultimately shift culture for workers, for in advertising, right? So we don't see these like terrible, like offensive ads, like getting that story across. That's what I'm most proud of, because like that's where I see like really my ability to have like a very clear impact, because like it gets in front of those people and it changes how these companies can operate. I should bring my full self to work. And that doesn't mean that everyone knows every dirty little secret or anything like that, but it does mean, not hiding parts of my identity or information I have. Like so much of what I do and what people in my industry do is creative problem solving. And so it's important to be able to approach it from different angles and have more voices in the room to be able to come up with the best ideas. One thing that I've been able to do at my company is start a queer employee resource group that is helpful, right? Because I'm able to take time out of my day that I'm not billing to clients and build community in this way and create an environment and a community at work for queer people and allies. Also, having queer people who are more senior than me who are in my corner has been really helpful as well, because I've been able to see, oh, you've succeeded not just in my industry, but at my company. In my life outside of work, I'm using they, them pronouns, and it's been a learning curve for people in my life. And at work, I mostly use they, them pronouns as well, because that, pronouns aren't gender, but like that describes where I'm coming from kind of more accurately. There's certain contexts, like with clients, sometimes no one's ever asked me to not, but like if a client makes an assumption because, they haven't received an email from me and seen it in my, that's not necessarily worth always like stopping the meeting, that's not what I'm looking for. So there's definitely situations where it passes. There are times where, I'm working with clients and it's never about their comfort, it's about my comfort. And when I work with clients who I know the owners have made some really questionable political donations, or they're located in states where my identity could be criminalized, and even if it would probably be fine and I know I would have the support from my coworkers, it's just it's scary. I definitely like wrestle with this specific question. How much does it matter if I'm working with a client for 3 months that they get my pronouns right? Like, does it? Or do I get the money and get out? And like, it's something that I'm still trying to navigate and figure out. Starting the ERG specifically for queer people, we realized there was enough of us and enough desire for community for it to be worthwhile for us to get together. It's been great for us. It's great for us every June when we see the Pride marketing come out, to have a place where we can honestly often complain about it. For the company culture, like we say, we're about inclusion, and being able to formally have groups that demonstrate that, I think, is really important. For the longest time, like branding was just like pictures and words. It's like, what's your logo? What's your name? What's your tagline? Now branding is about experiences, right? It's how you act. It's how you show up. We can't be a branding agency that says we're about inclusion and not do the actions of inclusion. So it's certainly helped with our brand, but then also it's, given us the opportunity to, as queer people, educate our coworkers because they need it. To my knowledge, everyone has the best of intentions. Like, I haven't overtly experienced any like queerphobia or transphobia at work from my coworkers, which is great. But they also, don't live and breathe this experience, and there are definitely gaps in knowledge. And so we've been able to help with that. It's even things like when a new person is onboarded and that we send out the announcement, the Slack saying, hey, welcome so and so to the team, making sure that there is a field with pronouns, because that wasn't there when I got hired. I because we write our own bios, I added it for myself, and that's now just part of the form. And it's like a little thing, but it makes it so that like it normalizes it. My senior project at Arizona State was to look at the history of marketing to queer people. So I have all this information about marketing to queer people going back to like the late 1800s. I had an opportunity to talk to my company about that, and people learn things, and that's great. It's both, educational and it's fun, and it just, it makes it a better place to work. I think the true equity, there's a number of components, right? Equal pay, that at every level I think is important. I think that I'm really skeptical of companies that say, oh, everyone at this level makes this amount, because I think that's actually a tool of large corporations to cut our pay collectively, because then you can't negotiate for more. So I don't think that that has been solved. I think that 20% of Gen Z is identifying as queer. That means that, as things move along, 20% of leaders should be queer, and 20% of middle management should be queer, and 20% of juniors should be queer. But also it means acknowledging that like the drop-off rate for certain communities is going to be higher, and navigating around that at hiring in on the junior levels, knowing that if there's a retention issue and you lose half of all your queer talent after 2 years, first of all, look at that and realize that you're doing something wrong if that's happening. But second of all, account for that in order to create those opportunities, because that, again, is going to create better work, right? People being able to show up at themselves in a creative field, like marketing, or showing up as themselves in the analytical side, writing a survey, knowing like, oh, we need to know why people do this. If people have an experience that's different, knowing why people might do that, then that ends up as an option on the quiz. And then people can select that and you can get better data. And then the inclusion piece, I think, is work that has to be done really deliberate by allies. I think that it's giving opportunities for us to create queer spaces for ourselves. I think it's being involved in that. I think that it's supporting and bringing in the trainings that people need to be inclusive. So if a leader does not get pronouns and they're struggling with it, like figure it out, because there are people you can hire, queer people, you can put money in queer pockets to teach you how to do this. So I think that inclusion piece for allies is really taking the time, recognizing that like if you're coming from the right place, like we love that and that's great. We just need to see that people are doing the work. Just saying you're inclusive is not inclusive. It's an action that people have to do. So often you have to frame things in business as like what's good for the company. For them, it means better work, and they can get more clients, and they can win more awards, or whatever the case may be, make more money. For queer people, it means better experiences at work, which sets us up to do better work and be happier. And it's not corporations' jobs to make their employees happy, but if they want to retain them, it is. I think the advice that I would give to my younger self, I think just do what you're going to do. Everything I did, like the good stuff, the mistakes, like it got me where I am today, and I'm happy where I am today. I kind of want to let my younger self stay on their path. But advice that I would give to other people, other queer people who want to go into STEAM, is find community. That's been the biggest thing for me. And I think that creates those conditions to like get opportunities, because let's face it, like breaking in is hard in a lot of industries, especially STEAM fields. It shows us that we can succeed. It's a way to find mentorship. Finding community has been the biggest benefit to my career, and like outside of my career as well. Like I've made like genuine friendships. Finding community is the answer. We've got to stick together. On LinkedIn is a great place, or Fishbowl is a great place, because there are groups of people who are like out in marketing. I know, even though I'm not in tech, I am in the out in tech Slack environment, and I've taken a lot of inspiration from that group. But those things exist across industries. Once you find one person in the community that can show you all the cool places, that's definitely been part of it too, is being curious and being inquisitive. And like when I meet people who are queer in my industry, you know, not being afraid to ask, hey, are you part of any professional networks? Hey, like, what is your advice for me specifically as a queer person navigating this? What did you do? What do you wish you had known? Like, those are great questions. It's encouragement that becomes advice.